All right, so you should be able to hear me now. I'm using a different microphone setup here, but yeah. So what we're going to go over today is going to be the Senate bill, and then we're going to go over some free resources that are available, the ones that we use to kind of determine how things are taxed, if there are any tax law changes, things like that. Um, okay, so no audio. Um, okay, now we're working. Okay, perfect. All right, so yeah, so that's what we'll look at. We'll look at the Senate bill, and then we'll go over some of those resources, so that way you have the tools to actually go and do the research yourself, right? So, first resource we're going to look at, or first thing we're going to look at, is the bill. It's sitting at the Senate now. Nothing has changed since last week. They're going to have, so from receipt of bill, they have 30 days to actually consider it for a vote or reconsider it for whatever it is that they do. So I believe after the 30 days, or probably towards the end of the month, that's when we'll see some changes to this here. I haven't heard any chatter as far as what they're talking, or different talks, or anything on podcasts or YouTube videos or Rumble videos. So I'm not really sure what's happening with it, but we're just kind of waiting for the Senate to do its thing. They're fighting about a bunch of other things right now, so eventually they'll get to this. So I'll stop doing the updates until I actually hear something different on 1724. So we'll talk about other topics um, that affect taxes in general. So one of the things I wanted to talk about for this week is those resources, right? Where are they? What can you use them? How do you use them? I like to call it the matrix. So we're going to dive into the matrix. We're going to get an idea of what is out there, the types of changes that occur, and then pretty much go from there, right? So there are really um, several types of resources, right? You have your primary resources. Those primary resources are the one that the IRS uses um, to make a determination on your um, your tax situation, right? So whether something is deductible or not, whether something counts as income or not, um, that's kind of what they look at, right? And so based on Treasury procedures and IRS procedures, there's something called substantiation. So what you have to do is prove, hey, listen, I took this deduction. Again, this is during audits, right? So I took this deduction. Here's my proof in accordance with Treasury regulation or IRC regulation XYZ, right? So that is the importance of having access to the primary resources when it comes time to prove that you are in fact allowed to take certain deductions. Um, yeah, yeah. So that's the one thing that you want to look at. So we're going to look at some of those resources here, and then that way you are familiar with it. The first one, of course, is going to be the IRS webpage, right? But they have so much information on the page, it's hard to kind of figure out exactly what it is you should or should not use, or can and cannot use, right? These are what they call revenue bulletins, right? So as you can see, they come out every couple days. And so what they do is they go over. Okay, so TikTok is. I know why. Okay, go ahead and change TikTok here. Give me 1 second, y'all. Yeah, so yeah, TikTok is having an issue again with audio. Mm-mm-mm. Let's take a look here. Add a source here. Okay, yeah. So we're gonna look at the TikTok audio. Navigate over to YouTube. I'm on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook as well. So navigate over to there. I got to figure out what's going on in TikTok. So probably just going to exit the live now for TikTok, and then just navigate over to Twitch, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. I'm also on there, so that audio works. Um, okay, perfect. So yeah, so there are different types of sources, right? One of them is going to be internal revenue bulletins, as I mentioned, and these are essentially rulings or announcements that the IRS and Department of Treasury issue to taxpayers so they know, okay, this is how I treat this is how I treat that, right? So we're going to look at an example of one of those bulletins, right? So here's an example of one of the bulletins. As you can see, this one, there's a lot of information, right? And they talk about all kinds of different things on here. So, um, as you can see, right? So this one is several pages. This one is, um, oh, yeah, usually the page is up here somewhere, but I can't find it. So you can see this is actually, yeah, right here. So 16 pages, right? And 3 rows of information. So, and this happens every couple of weeks or so. So we're going to look at some of the stuff that's changed here. So these are some of the administrative changes that have occurred. So this revenue ruling holds that if one or more of a state's allocation under Section 305 of Taxpayer Certainty and Disaster Order 2020, the qualified disaster zone 2021-2022 will return after 2022, it sounds googly goggly, right? So it's one of those things where it takes time to kind of assimilate this. That's why tax preparers rely so heavily on software, because the software actually takes into account, or should take into account, these changes. However, it's not something that the IRS, you can't tell the IRS, well, I put it in the system and the software made an error, and they're not going to accept that as an excuse for submitting an incorrect return or putting in an incorrect deduction, right? So it's always good to read through these. I read through these every time they come out. I kind of skim them, make sure there's nothing that's affecting my clients, or just get some general familiarity with it, because it's impossible to memorize all this stuff, right? It's just impossible. And anyone that tells you that they can is lying, right? Um, so this is just one of the changes. This is one of the revenue bulletins. This one talks about administrative stuff. This one talks about exempt organizations. So there's some changes 2 exempt organizations, and then how they qualify as exempt organizations. There's some changes to income tax in general. The Treasury Department and the IRS intend to propose regulations addressing the requirements to determine in which population census tracts qualified alternative fuel vehicles. Refueling properties must be placed in service in order to be eligible for the alternative fuel. So basically, what they're saying is, okay, they're reconsidering which areas actually will qualify for this alternative fuel tax credit that you get when use your when you use alternative fuels, hydrogen, nitrogen for your cars, whatever it is, right? Or ethanol type, certain ethanol based fuels, especially for truck drivers, qualify for a special tax credit. So what they're doing now is they're saying, okay, well, maybe if you're in these areas, we're not going to consider you for this tax credit, but if you're in these areas, you are. So notices like this are things that we have to kind of pay attention to. Also, there's some stuff about Maryland. That's one of the things that we'll eventually get into is state taxes in general are a nightmare for people like me, right? Because each state has different requirements, different credits, different rules and regulations, different percentages. And some states have agreements, what they call reciprocal agreements with each other. Some states don't. So I generally avoid going into any state that has state income tax or operating a business in those states. I understand some people don't have that choice. But yeah, that's what I would avoid anything related to. But we'll talk more about it in a future video. But you'll see some updates on that kind of stuff here with IRS bulletins. You can use the bulletins as a primary resource. So when you're trying to prove certain deductions or prove certain things that you did on your tax return, you can use these as evidence as to why you can do it, right? And you'll see that there are some resources that the IRS puts out that you can't use. Even though they put them out, you can't use it as a primary resource. So yeah, see, this is more information on the fuel refueling property credit. So if you're bored, you can actually read through all this and get the specifics on it. But this is one of the resources. You just Google IRS bulletins or Internal Revenue bulletins. It's one of the first things that'll pop up, right? Another thing that you actually want to look at, and that is a primary source, is the actual tax code, right? So these are about the 8,000 pages IRC Title 26 that affect essentially the taxes. So this will give you just a general overview of the different avenues that you can take. So here you can go to Treasury tax regulations. Here you go to the actual IRC. And then there are other resources that you can access here. They're primary resources, right? And official tax guidance here as well. So from this website, you can actually get to the actual code, right? Which is the matrix. So this is the U.S. code, United States code, all the federal laws that are out there. Title 18, Title 19, which is the customs duties, Food and Drug Administration. Here, Title 26 is where you have all the IRS updates or the IRS rules, right? So this is essentially the main source for a lot of the changes. And so here, you can go through all the chapters, take a look at all the regulations. Again, software takes into account these, but they have Chapter 1, Subchapter A, B, C, D, E, F, G, X, Y, all the way over to Z. And the same thing for Chapter 2, Self-Employment. You're going to have different subchapters within the self-employment, right? So this is another source that you can use to prove, hey, listen, I can take this deduction and here's why, right? The Treasury Department also puts out federal regulations that affect you. And so you can also use the Treasury Department's regulations on how certain things are treated or procedures on how to go about responding to the IRS for letters and things like that, right? So these also have chapters and subchapters and things like that, which you can actually read through if you're bored, and go through all this information, right? Um, there are also publications. So the IRS puts out treasury or publications that go over certain aspects of the tax code, right? Each year they put out a different publication, or they put out the updates from, in theory, they put the updates from the IRC and the Treasury and the bulletins into these publications, right? So it's easy to read. So anything relating to federal income tax withholdings will go into this publication, right? 15C. And then you can go through and read the intent behind what the IRS is actually considering, right? Um, so basically, the publications can be used as a guide, but you cannot use it as a primary resource, right? So you have to use either the bulletins or something else. You cannot use the publications, but they do provide you with a very good overview of how things are taxed and the procedures. So some of the publications that are out there, and you can see they're in different languages also, so you can access those. Um, so you have a tax guide for small businesses. So if you wanted to know certain things about Schedule C, sole proprietors, you can go in and take a look at some of that stuff here. Self-employed, what an LLC is, what a sole proprietor is. So that's basically the stuff that we get tested on, right? So we have to do continuing education on this and just read through this because they change things around quite often, actually. Um, so yeah, so this is one of the things that you can look at. You can look at these publications, and like I said, there's all kinds of publications, right? So like for example, anything with 7024 is probably not going to make the publication, 503 for the child dependent care expenses or the child care credits. It's just not going to make it because they, at the end of the year, they kind of, that's when they publish these, right? So that's why you have to also rely on your bulletins and the announcements that the IRS has to report, to properly report your taxes to them, right? This is one that talks about some of the deadlines. Some of the deadlines change based on if you're in a disaster area, and throughout the year they just sometimes say, okay, this date is going to have XYZ time to get this done, just because of whatever has happened in that state at that time. So this is again more information that you can access, and again, this is all free when you're preparing your taxes. Other sources, one source that I particularly like to use is the Tax Foundation, right? So they do a lot of research on tax policy, not just here, but overseas as well, in Europe, right? So they'll put out like state and local tax rates for 2024, updates that have happened from 2022 to 2023, as far as the state taxes are concerned, federal taxes. So they're a lot more comprehensive than, say, the bulletins, and they're in English, right? So it's not like you have to actually try to decipher, well, what do they mean by this? They do a good job at just communicating in plain English. Here's what is going on. You can't use this as a primary resource, but it's a tool, and it gets you to the primary resource so you can actually do your taxes properly, right? And so these are the resources that I like to access every once in a while, just so that, hey, I don't remember if there was an update on this. Let me go in tax policy, and then I'll go into the bulletins from there to get an actual primary resource, so that if the IRS comes knocking on the door, I have my ammo ready, right? So having said that, let's take a look at one of the announcements from the IRS regarding the 1099-K rule that is eventually going to get passed in 2024. We'll talk about other things um, as well other requirements that reporting requirements that are going to come out in 2024. But for now, we'll just talk about the 1099K. This was something they've been considering for several years now. 2022, I believe they were going to implement it. We made enough fuss about it, like, hey, you can't just change this right away. Companies are not going to be ready. So they delayed it for the 2022 tax year. It was on, off, and then off again. Like it was off and it was on and it was off again. So they went back and forth on that. But this time they're delaying it until next tax year, right? So 2024. Basically, what they're looking at is initially anything over $20,000 when, like, let's say you were using Venmo or Cash App or any of these money transfer services, they would issue you a 1099K if you received over 20K on that app, and then based on that, you would have to report it and say, okay, hey, this was or was not a business expense. My problem with this whole 1099K thing was they were issuing penalties, $250 per 1099K that was not issued to these vendors if they failed to issue a 1099K when they actually needed to, right? So what are vendors going to do? They're going to say, well, hey, I'm not going to have that liability. I'm just going to send 1099Ks to everybody. But what happens is now you have to go in if mom sent you money to pay the rent or to buy groceries. Now you have to claim that as income, and then it just becomes a nightmare on the actual tax return. So they delayed it, and initially it was over 20K and 200 transactions, but then it went down to $600. So that's pretty much everybody, right? They want to know everybody's information. Well, that is a compliance burden for the companies that are actually reporting these 1099Ks, but also for the taxpayer, because now they have to worry about, do I report this? How do I report this? It just becomes a pain, right? So they delayed it in 2023 to kind of first figure out what that threshold is going to eventually be. Right now, what they're saying is, okay, well, 600 is too low, and it is, in my opinion. So they're going to they're floating the $5,000 figure, right? So anything over five, that's when they'll issue 1099Ks, and then you have to go from there. And in theory, it's only for business accounts. So what they're saying is, yeah, no, if you have a personal Venmo account, we're not going to issue you a 1099K. Only for the business accounts. But I don't know. I mean, I just feel like they might not want, the vendors might not want that liability and just say, oh, hey, look, we're gonna just send it. It's not gonna hurt if we send it. They're gonna pay a couple of cents to produce the 1099K and send it, versus a potential for $250,000 or $250 penalty for not issuing it. So I mean, it becomes a math problem at that time. So I just think you're going to see a huge influx of 1099Ks for people that were not supposed to receive one but did, and now that becomes a tax compliance issue for that person. So again, yeah, so they're delayed it to 2024. We'll keep an eye on this throughout the year, and I'll let you know how this goes. But they're supposedly lowering it to 5,000. See, yeah, right now they're saying 600, regardless of the number of transactions. But see, these notices here are the ones that get issued, and then that way you can actually see what those changes are, right? So 2022 delayed, and it goes over details. That's why when you ask, and you ask one accountant one thing, and they'll tell you one thing, and then you'll ask another accountant a different thing. They'll tell you a different thing, because you have notices, you have the code, you have the bulletins, you have the publications, you have the analysis, the tax laws, the actual court cases, that the actual court cases that come out. So you look at three different resources, they tell you three different things, and then you're like, okay, well, which one's right? So each person just kind of goes, okay, well, we're gonna just go with this one, and then justify it if we need to, right? Um, Let me see here. So there are some websites that I've seen where you can actually find U.S. Tax court cases. So here, if there is a particular case, basically United States Tax Court, if there's a particular case that you are interested in, you can go in and search and see what's available, and then you can use that as a primary resource to deduct to substantiate certain deductions. Um, you have to know kind of the petitioner's name and the date of the case, but you can get that from like the bulletins, or um, you can get that from the tax foundation. So certain private and nonprofit organizations can get you a general idea, so you can actually look at what's behind the door, right? Um, so yeah, so this was pretty much what I wanted to talk about this week. Kept keeping it short and simple. These are some of the free resources. There are also resources through TurboTax and through H&R Block. I mean, they have blogs where you can actually go in and research tax deductions. Yeah, so basically you go in there and they'll provide you with some free information. I mean, this is not a TurboTax um, commercial, but yeah, so here, so they have little white papers that you can actually go in and read. But just remember that you cannot tell the IRS, hey, I saw this on the TurboTax website, and so I'm going to deduct it. Right? It doesn't work that way. You actually have to verify it with the actual Treasury Department, the bulletins, or any tax court cases that are out there. Um, H&R Block has similar resources. TaxSlayer, they all have similar resources out there that are available. If you go to my website, you'll see certain articles on there that you can actually download and read and get updates on that as well. Um, the one key thing, even for accountants sometimes, is it's in such legalese that it's hard to understand exactly what they mean. So in those cases, what you have to kind of actually do is get a private letter ruling from the IRS, and that is only in the event that it's something that, it's a huge deduction, and there's kind of a gray area and the tax law doesn't really cover it, right? So essentially you put a packet together to the IRS letting them know, hey, look, here's what I'm deducting and why I'm deducting it. And then they say, okay, for you and for you only, you can deduct this, or you can do this process. So somebody else can't say, well, there was a private letter ruling, in California, and I want to take the same deduction. It doesn't work that way. You have to get your own ruling based on the fact pattern. So, I mean, it is what it is. It's just one of those things. But like I said, the tax code should just be simple. It should be something, a flat tax. You go in, you pay it, and you're done. You don't have to do all these reportings. But of course, there's special interests. There's things that play politics. There's things that play that are beyond our control, definitely, as tax preparers. We can advocate through different tax organizations. Um, National Association for Tax Preparation. There's a bunch of them out there. The Enrolled Agents Association, the CPA associations. So they lobby the government to make changes to whatever tax law, like this 1099-K thing was a big push by all the different organizations to kind of delay it, to allow people time to comply. Um, so yeah, so that is pretty much it. Next week we'll talk about the state taxes, because I was looking to see if I found any YouTube videos on state taxes, and of course I didn't, because there's such a wide array of state tax information, and I mean, each state is its own little nightmare. So that's why I choose to not go to any state that has an income tax, because on top of what the federal government is taking, now the state government wants their cut, and then the city wants their cut, right? So, but yeah, next week we'll dive into state taxes probably a little bit more. I did make some posts on some of the changes that occurred in 34 states. In general, they've kind of lowered the income tax for a lot. Some states like Michigan actually increased it. So good luck with that. Um, but we'll dive deeper into state taxes, reciprocation or reciprocal agreements between different states, and then just in general overview of how state taxes are reported, right? So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to email me, send me a message through LinkedIn, through Facebook, through YouTube. I will get the TikTok feed going for next week. Every time there's an update to the computer, the audio changes up on you. So it's not just getting in front of the camera and spitting hot air. There's a whole infrastructure behind the scenes that you have to have, and I'm kind of learning that the hard way. So yeah, so thanks again for your support, and then we'll see you next week. And again, let me know if you have any questions from here until next week. All right, bye for now.